Merkel Media.
What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Well, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Daylight NBC.
Jack Marius Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Muammar Gaddafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles in Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on Rockfin or Rumble, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, thanks a million. We know that you have a lot of choices out there. We appreciate it. And we thank you for your support. Have you rated the show? Oh, I certainly would appreciate it. It'll take you about 3 seconds on your little podcast player. The algorithm says that it's better if I have more 5-star reviews. So if you think I've earned a 5-star review, I'll take it. And write a little something nice too. I won't be mad at that. If you want to connect with me directly, the website, macroaggressions.io. That's the best place to do that. You can find information about the books and the podcasts, and there are more than one. And also social media. It's all there. It's all happening, as Alex says. Thanks to our sponsors. They make the show happen. Solar Power Lifestyle has been a nice treat for us because you got to have a solar guy in your team, right? And this one happens to be a listener of the show who owns the company. So if you are so inclined, you want to help out somebody that likes the same shows that you like and owns a company called Solar Power Lifestyle, do this. Just go to their website, read up about it, see what you think. They've got little bitty solar power generators like the one they sent me, 25 watt, 3-panel, fold up, $80. Holding it up for the camera for those of you not watching. You can put that in your backpack, put that in the trunk of your car. You could put whatever, a bug out bag, you name it. Go to solarpowerlifestyle.com and read about everything that they've got. I mean, they've got it from these small little $80 kits to your entire home if you want it. So let's be proactive. Let's have a backup plan. Let's have a backup source of power, right? That seems like a reasonable thing to do. So go to solarpowerlifestyle.com. Discount code on your way out the door is macro. Also, thanks to the folks at EMP Shield. Again, let's stick with the theme of being proactive here. I hope you don't need to use any of these devices, but if you need them, you're going to be really glad you had them. And EMP Shield works on your house. It works on your cars. It works on your generator if you've got one, or boat, or whatever. You can get bundle packages. It'll protect your equipment against EMPs, solar flares, lightning strikes, all that stuff. I don't know about eclipses. It might. I don't know. They may bring out the big guns on this eclipse. EMP Shield does not work against solar eclipses created by CERN. I will tell you that. That is their disclaimer. But it works on just about everything else. It's many times more efficient than a single-use military design. It can handle up to 40 EMP strikes. It's fitted to a household circuit breaker with just 4 wires. You can install it like a Type 2 surge protector. There's installation videos online. You can do it yourself. You can have an electrician can come over and knock it out in 15 minutes probably. So take a look. Go to empshield.com and use the discount code Macro. Well, I'm going to do something a little different for this episode. We're just picking a year and we're going. 1948 is the year. And there was a lot going on in 1948. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to like work backwards or work forwards or do anything like that. But from time to time, I think this is going to be something that I might dust off, because I kept coming across the year 1948. And you know how you get into those weird grooves with the universe where like all of a sudden everything that you do is correlated to some obscure number or date or something, and you just keep seeing it everywhere, and you're like, okay, I think the universe is maybe telling me to pay attention to this because I keep seeing it everywhere, or at least now I'm noticing it. And for whatever reason, 1948 just kept bombarding me, and I have no particular association to it, except that I do often mention the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948. And we'll mention it in here too. But by and large, you know, I don't have an emotional connection to this year. But my God, when you dig into it and you see and you take a look at everything that was going on during this year, and some of the things that had been started a couple years in advance and continued through this duration, you're going to be like, man, this is a really important time. I mean, and boiled down to a very particular year too. And so, you know, I'm going to do what I always do, which is I'm going to talk about some statistics about things that were going on. I'll find some important facts that are surrounding it. I'll talk shit about some of the people that were involved in it because they need it. We'll get into, we'll start domestically inside the United States. We'll work our way out to internationally. Man, there was so much happening during this year, and so let's just jump in. I mean, because you sort of need to set the stage for what was going on in the world in order to understand 1948 a little bit better. We're 2.5 years out of the end of World War II. And Europe was in rubbles, and parts of Asia were in rubbles as well. Philippines, Manila was flattened. Parts of China had been destroyed. So, you know, from the early 30s, the Japanese were going to work on them. Small obscure islands in the South Pacific were completely and utterly obliterated. We dropped bombs on Japan. You might have heard. And it was, I mean, anywhere from North Africa to Eastern Europe, you had devastation. All of Europe basically was on fire, except Switzerland. Funny how that happens, huh? You have to have the special get out of jail free card to live in Switzerland. Yeah, funny, they never, all the gold CERN is there. I mean, it probably responsible for some of this insanity. A lot going on in Switzerland. We're going to do an episode on Switzerland. I've just decided. those people have been hiding out in that beautiful country for far too long. I've been to Switzerland a couple times. It really is beautiful. It really is like the Sound of Music. You feel like you just want to twirl around on a mountain. But we're not. We're going to stick with this. We're going to get into, let's start domestically with what's going on in the United States. So you're 2.5 years out of the war, right? And Europe's leveled, and Asia, for the most part, is totally incapacitated. South America hasn't really become a problem. America's got the world to itself, essentially. That process was being slowed up because the British insisted on sort of believing that the British Empire was still intact as an overt empire. It wasn't. It was just about to come completely apart in the 50s. They just didn't know it at this point. But the currency was a mess. a decision had been made to pivot to the dollar. The gold had been taken out of Europe for safekeeping, of course, in Fort Knox. You dummies fell for that trick. That's the oldest trick in the book. Oh, it's very unsafe where you've got your gold in your area. Why don't you come give it to us? We, the Americans, will take care of your gold. I mean, it's not raining bombs on us, right? So doesn't it make sense to store your gold here? Well, yeah, I guess it does make sense. I mean, I certainly don't want the Soviets or the Germans or somebody pilfering our central bank and stealing all of our gold. Yeah, come keep it in Kentucky, in Fort Knox. And we're definitely not going to move it out the back door and sell it all or steal it or whatever we've done with it. But that was the reality of the United States. It was a safe haven. It had not been bombed to smithereens. It was starting to crank up their industrial capacity even further than it had already been. During World War II, they were coming off of that. A lot of people were coming back home. They were lucky to be alive, or at least they felt that way. They were starting families. There was the baby boomers. This is when the baby boomers come back, and this whole thing just starts, full swing. This is it. You're back from the war. You didn't die, and every day is like like a free day for you because you saw your friends on either side of you get bayoneted in a foxhole, and you didn't, and you're living on borrowed time. It's a good time to be alive. And they dragged that mentality back to America. And so the population of America at this time was 148 million. To put it in perspective now, it's about 340 million. So we're about 200 million people more currently than we had back then. It might be 300 million more by the time Biden gets done. We'll see. The jury's still out. The way this population was divvied up across the United States, it's interesting. I mean, it's the Northeast corridor had about 40 million people. The Midwest, for those of you that aren't from America, the Midwest is like, I don't know, flyover. It's like anywhere from like, I think for the purposes of this, they sort of considered anything in the Rust Belt, anything in the middle of the United States. They have 44 million people there. The South, which is considered like Tennessee, North Carolina, and below, that was the largest segment. That was 47 million, and there were only 20 million people in the West. Okay, so it was one of those things where Hollywood was just getting started. We didn't have the industrial capacity of Silicon Valley. That wasn't going to happen for a couple more years. They're just, you're living off gold rush people from in San Francisco and the Chinese that they imported in to work on the railroads. And there was a lot of that still out there. And people were starting to migrate this direction. It probably was going to help more in the 50s once the interstate highways were put in, and that sort of opened up travel, not just to relocate permanently, but it opened up vacation travel too. And of course, the automobile was becoming a huge thing. Obviously, it had been around for a while, but as you start to move into the 50s Americana, it's all about the car. It's all about the open road. It's all about all of that. And so when you look back at 1948, we're just about to launch into the 50s. And, but we still had some of the same old problems. Our debt to GDP ratio is 100%. We had just as much debt as we had gross domestic product. So, but they explained that away because they said, listen, we were just ramping up. It was wartime. So we were running at a very unusual rate. And in fact, Truman became president in 1948. The country was in a recession, but, they sort of, like I said, they kind of passed that along as like post-war retooling the economy, moving from a war footing to more of a domestic peacetime footing, where instead of building trucks for the front lines of World War II in these Ford factories, you could make cars for suburban dads or whatever, you know what I mean? So things sort of changed, and there was a lag in that. That's to be expected. And really, the government lies about everything. I really don't think that they were lying too much about this, because within 11 months, that recession had turned around and things had gotten back on track. So somebody must have been telling the truth at some point. God was taken out of instruction at U.S. schools as just an interesting sort of tidbit. That was something that was going on. And the life expectancy in 1948 was 67.2 years, and now it's 79 years. So just since then, this is, we're talking about 76 years ago. You could expect to live a full 12 years longer. Let me rephrase that. You now have to live 12 years longer. You're stuck. If you're in San Francisco or New York City, you're like, I have to live 12 years longer. They're like, yep. And everything is going to get incrementally worse for you as well. This is the start of the Marshall Plan. This is when you might have heard of the Marshall Plan. That went on from 1948 to 1951. And this is when the United States, because they were in a better financial situation than everyone else, started giving aid to post-war Western Europe. And that there were 16 countries there. I think they'd earmarked like $10 billion or maybe even a little bit more than that. They wound up giving them about $5 billion to 16 countries. $5 billion in 1948 money is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of money. And especially after you're just coming out of your entire country being leveled, you're probably going to need every single penny of that. So the Marshall Plan was touted as this big deal. I think in reality, it kind of was less impressive than it was supposed to be. But as politicians do, they say, wait, it was a huge success and we made this all happen. And, this is how magnanimous we are. We're giving you all this free money. Oh, by the way, it's never free money when it comes from the United States. I mean, it always comes with strings attached. And of course, this money was no different either. So they formed something called the Office of Policy Coordination. This was an early intelligence agency. This was a time, the post-war, like the immediate post-war, was a time when a lot of the intelligence apparatus of the United States was being formulated and put together. CIA was founded in 1947 in September. So we're talking about like 4 months later, you're in 1948 with a brand new CIA. We'll get to that in a second. RAND, the think tank RAND, was formed. It's based in Santa Monica now. I'm not really sure where it was back when it started. Hey, you guys remember back when, back in the 80s, I think it was, it might have been the 90s, back when Donald Rumsfeld was the CEO of RAND Corporation and Frank Carlucci was the chairman of the board of RAND, and they were both also randomly college roommates at Princeton. And then they both went on to, after doing RAND, they all both went on to formulate the plans for 9/11. Do you remember that? That was awesome. That was awesome. But that company RAND, where they both worked, that totally isn't a deep state CIA funded think tank or anything. They started in 1948 in the aftermath of World War II, and they were put together as a way to formulate World War III. I mean, to make sure we don't get into World War III. Whatever. They're out there plotting and planning right now. RAND is a corporation that's been around. I mean, they're knee deep in it. Okay. As evidenced by their spooked board of directors and all that stuff. So take a look at them one of these days. As I mentioned, I would be remiss if I didn't go into the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948. God knows I've talked about it ad nauseum. But what it did is it prohibited propaganda until 2013. It didn't say it in their charter that we're going to start this in 1948, and then a Kenyan Indonesian gentleman is going to pretend to become the president of the United States and legalize lying and propaganda inside America to be used on Americans. That actually was a bit of a surprise to the people that created the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, because they did it with an understanding that propaganda gets you into situations where you're goose stepping around Berlin and doing all that stuff and resettling people in the East, and that was a bad thing, admittedly, by all involved, and that therefore, in order to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again, to the extent that maybe we don't want it to, of course they probably do want it to, but anyway, then we should probably say, all that propaganda stuff that we use on foreign countries, let's not use it here in America on our own people, because it's really effective. If you do it a certain way, you can get people to believe absurdities. I mean, next thing you know, if you use this propaganda inside America on Americans, you'll get people lined up on a dot that's 6 feet away from someone, or you might even be able to convince them to walk a certain direction down the grocery store aisle because a virus might get them in the face, or crawl on their knees, or Purell their grocery store bags when they get home from this. You know what I mean? If we're not careful with propaganda, it'll come back to haunt us, right? Yeah. Well, they knew this in 1948, and they prohibited it, and that lasted a while. It didn't last long enough. It lasted 65 years, and then Obama gutted it so that they could use propaganda on Americans. And they do. The CIA was formed about 100 days before 1948. Okay. So that's barely enough time for you to get all the paperwork squared away. One of the first things that they did in 1948 was they pushed through what is known as NSC 10-2. This is a document which authorized the CIA to operate anywhere in the world to carry out covert actions. These actions include, but certainly are not limited to, and by the way, they spell out the actions in the NSC 10-2 document. To escape from mere generalizations, we authorize you to be involved in the following: sabotage, propaganda, Smith-Mundt Act, demolition, evacuation measures, economic warfare, subversion against hostile states, and underground resistance movements, including anti-communist movements. So what they gave them, what they said to the CIA in 1948 is, we're going to give you the license to kill, lie, cheat, and steal. And we're never going to prosecute you for it, because it's in your charter. It's what we want you to do. So when you hear about what the CIA is doing overseas and destabilizing groups, and you find out that there are limitations to what they are able to do in foreign countries, that limitation is always financial. Let me rephrase that. That limitation is either financial or a matter of perception management. It'd be bad for optics if you got caught doing this. So either we don't have the money to pay for it, or you, the CIA, don't have the money to run this operation, or it would look really bad if you ran this operation right now. Those are the two reasons why the CIA wouldn't put a particular operation into place. But here's what they wouldn't be concerned with. They wouldn't be concerned with breaking the law or violating their charter or going to prison or anything like that, because they're supposed to do all these things. They're set up to do all these things. All those things that you go, oh God, they can't do that. They'll wind up in prison. No, they're not going to wind up in prison. This is why the CIA can parachute in at the last second to the Hunter Biden thing and say, he's not talking to you guys. And you go, what the fuck is the CIA doing involved in this? He works for them. Get it now? Understand it now? Hunter Biden works for the CIA. He's a partner with them. He might not have a business card that says CIA, but he is a partner of theirs. And this is what they do. So it's bad for perception management purposes if you get your guy in trouble doing this. And it sucks if you don't have the money to go do all these things that you want to do. But you're certainly not going to go to prison for it. Let's just make sure that's clear, because that is what NSC 10-2 made sure of, that they were authorized not just to operate anywhere in the world, but they were authorized to take part in these. Hell, that's why we created you. If we wanted you to sit around and not do these things, we could do that. We created a group that specifically was above the law. So, but in just 3 short years from 1948, when we've unleashed this CIA on the world and we've started the process of the Cold War and all of that. 3 years from this year, you will hear the president of the United States, you will hear Dwight Eisenhower come out and say that you need to be very careful of the military-industrial complex. And he was right, because they are... I did an episode called "The United States of Lockheed Martin," and when you dig into how intertwined they are, it is really hard to figure out where the government ends and where the military-industrial complex begins. They're so intertwined. They're so inbred with one another. And of course, a lot of these companies are just geographically close to the Beltway in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's a nest of snakes that want war. And they know that they need to be as close to the place that has all the money and the desire for war, and that's the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And so that's why they are physically located close to that. When you hear all these stories about people in the, outside of Maryland, in Maryland and places like this, outside of the Washington, D.C. Beltway, that's the military-industrial complex. A lot of their companies are set up out there. The intelligence agencies are out there as well. So, they were, and part of the reason why, in 1948, you're starting to see some, you'd think you'd be done with war. You would think. Well, you would be wrong, of course, because it only took 2 years from this point before they had a hot war with Korea going on in 1950. Okay. And that lasted until, the hot war in Korea lasted for like 2 or 3 years. But something else happened in 1948, and that was the beginning of the Cold War. That was when it really kicked off into high gear, was that we'd come out of 2.5 years of what was going on in the Soviet Union, with them coming at Germany from one side. And when the war ended in Berlin, the belief was that the Soviets were going to just continue at some point and finish off Western Europe. They're just going to keep moving to the West and finish off Western Europe. And so everyone was a little bit uncomfortable about this. And they thought, well, if this is to happen, we can't necessarily tell America to leave like right away, because if they leave and then the Soviets just are sitting around waiting for America to leave and go back home, and then they continue this onslaught to the West, maybe it's 6 months later, maybe it's 2 years later, whatever, they're going to keep their eyes open. So one of the things that they did in 1948 was Operation Gladio. And they started that actually before NATO was founded. NATO wasn't going to even come into play until the following year, 1949. But in 1948, they started the beginnings of Operation Gladio, which was a leave-behind network of terror cells that they embedded all throughout Western Europe. Basically, it was like, if the Soviets come, if they do decide to just, that Berlin is not enough, that these terms that we have laid out, that aren't going to work for them, and they've decided that they are going to, in fact, try and take the rest of Western Europe, these little embedded terror cells will be enough to create enough havoc for the Soviets and bog them down and create issues for them that'll buy the Americans enough time to get back over, and the Brits and the French and all that stuff, to put their armies together to then come back and have to fight them. So Gladio was always sort of like an insurance policy, and then nothing happened. And so when you've got a bunch of terror cells sitting around with nothing to do, waiting for something to happen, they go making things happen. And that's, of course, what NATO wound up doing. We've done entire episodes on Operation Gladio. I won't rehash that whole thing, but that's when it started. This is the year when everyone got pre-positioned around, and they stayed there. And they stayed in Operation Gladio for like 15 years. That was going on like hardcore in Western Europe for a while. It eventually sort of went away in the early 80s, but that was only because it got discovered by judges and things like that. So the hot war in Korea lasted for 2 years. The Cold War that started in 1940, it lasted till 1991. I mean, it lasted a long time, over 30 years, and sucked a lot of money into the military industrial complex. And of course, it never turned into a hot war with Russia, but it turned into a really nice pipeline of influence and money that was pooling into in the regions around these military industrial complex companies that were building aircraft and building weapon systems and starting to get into the technology of computers and things like that. It was a real interesting time, and the government their hands were tied in some respects. That some of the things they couldn't do, they would just outsource to these businesses like the McDonnell Douglas and Grumman, Northrop Grumman, and all these, Lockheed, Martin Marietta, all the ones that became Lockheed Martin. Over the years, these groups have kind of done what the oil companies have done. They've kind of clumped together, bought other companies, broken apart, and done all that stuff. So, but back in 1948, they were really coming out of the chaos of war, where it was like, just build, and we'll figure it out later. And then once you've had a couple years to digest this and you weren't on a war footing, it was like, okay, now how can we intertwine ourselves with the American government to a point where they can never get rid of us? And that is what happened starting in 48, really, with this push towards the Cold War. And then these vines grew all around each other over the next 30 years. And by the time the Cold War ended, you really can't break the government away. Dwight Eisenhower was correct in his warnings. 1948, the Berlin blockade began too, and that was really freaking out Washington, D.C. Again, we're talking about the reasons why Gladio kind of sprung up in 48 was because there was still some nonsense going on in Berlin. The Soviets had barricaded off a portion of the city, and the Americans couldn't get resources there, so they started it was called the Berlin blockade. And this is what really started to freak out Washington, D.C. They're like, well, listen, I mean, it's not going to take them much to make the decision that, they're blockading this area. Berlin got split in half, which was really weird, because you had one part was like East Berlin and the other part was West Berlin. And there were problems accessing West Berlin. You had to go through the territory that was controlled by the Soviets and things like that. So it created these logistical problems, and the logistical problems started to almost turn into military problems. And that was what the Berlin blockade was about. So, just to give you an idea of the economy of America back then, because I think it's important to sort of put things into like, what was America back then? 48, it's a long time ago, right? Was it the same? Was it, we sort of make these assumptions. It's got sort of the same military or the same economic engine. No. America was much smaller than it is now. The GDP for the US back then in today's dollars works out to about $514 billion, right? We're in like our economy now is like, I don't even know, frankly, 20 trillion. I don't know. It's a lot. 30 trillion. Who knows? I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But it's considerably smaller back then. The federal spending in today's dollars works out to about $56 billion. So it was way less. I mean, we spend $56 billion sending rubber dog shit to Ukraine. You know what I mean? Like we don't have a problem doing any of that. The federal debt, $480 billion in today's. Maybe we put it in a term that you can understand. The cost of a first class postage stamp in 1948 was 3 cents. The cost now is 68 cents. But I'm sure the Federal Reserve and inflation had nothing to do with that, right? Wink, wink. There were a couple things that were going on that we're gonna put them in the category of 1948 only because they didn't start in 1948 and they didn't end in 1948. These were operations and instances that had started right around there, maybe a little bit before, and continued on just a little bit afterwards. Something such as Operation Paperclip. Paperclip started right after the war. The war ends the summer of 45. You get about 2.5 years before you get into 1948. And I will tell you that they were already packaging up German scientists and shipping them off to the United States and the Soviet Union too, immediately, if not during the war. So there was plenty of time that this was going on, but it didn't end for years. So Operation Paperclip, the extraction, retention, and of the scientists had been going on for quite a while, and it continued. And of course, in the aftermath of Operation Paperclip, of course, we get Wernher von Braun, and we get all the German scientists that are working and forming NASA, and the people that are deeply involved in our space program. I put that in quotation marks, and the ballistic missile program and all of that good stuff. So, as they say, Germany lost the war, but the Nazis didn't. The Nazis were fine. The Nazis, some of them moved to Alabama and worked on the rocket program with von Braun, and some of them were relocated to other parts of the United States where they were involved in all sorts of secretive things, like our pharmaceutical industry, and involved in what we were doing with adding fluoride to the water, and what we were doing with Stanford Research Institute and those guys up there that were trying to remote view things. And they brought the Paperclip guys into anything that it seemed could make sense. But that was an operation that was happening before 48 and all the way continuing through the year, as well as our favorite Guatemala syphilis experiment. It's our favorite because Bill Clinton had to get out in front of a camera and microphone and admit to it and apologize for giving an entire country syphilis, which is ironic considering that Bill Clinton himself probably gave a small country syphilis during his time as the governor of Arkansas. But that's just speculation on my part, right? Also, the year before, 1947, do you remember what happened out in the desert of New Mexico? Because I do. That's Roswell. And Roswell is an extremely important component of where we went with the U.S. space program. And our X-Protect, Majestic 12 programs, everything that had to do that came out of the Manhattan Project with those people getting moved to the arrival, the creation and of folklore in Area 51, S4. There's a lot going on. There's Air Force bases around the United States that sprung to action after Roswell. And you can discount the UFO file if you'd like, but I wouldn't if I were you, because it might be the most important component of the secrecy program that drives the entire United States government. Is who controls the UFO file controls quite a bit. And it is a classic intelligence trick to make you think that it doesn't even exist. And that is, of course, a big deal. Instances of polio were increasing. Same thing. I put this in the category of it didn't begin exactly on 1948, but it was a huge deal in 1948 that instances of polio were increasing, not just in the United States, but around the world. But it totally didn't have anything to do with it being an insecticide to combat malaria and typhus just a few years earlier, for sure. I mean, and it wasn't like a real indicator that when they removed it in 1972 for causing massive health and environmental issues, that wasn't an indicator that maybe, I don't know, maybe DDT had something to do with this, because DDT was being produced and was being sprayed all over the place in order to combat malaria and typhus. And what do you know? One of the side effects happens to be polio. But I was told that polio was cured by vaccines, and I have that on good authority. That's 100% true, even though the people that told me that polio was cured by vaccines are the least trustworthy people in the world. But that's a different episode for a different day. So domestically, the planning on the international portion was happening too, right? So they're working on America, right? They're trying to make America great, not again, but for the first time, right? And they're focusing quite a bit of energy on that, but not all of it, because they still need to keep an eye on what's going on in Europe. So we're going to pivot a little bit out of the domestic policy and more into what the international happenings were in 1948. Well, we'll sort of transition, we'll sort of lube it up like this, because we'll start with a little Americanism going into the European theater, and that is American Committee on United Europe. Have you heard of this group? You probably have never heard of the American Committee on United Europe. It was founded with money from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation. I'm sure you're very surprised. Isn't it interesting that the American Committee on Uniting Europe is founded with money from two organizations that were also financing Adolf Hitler? That would be the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation. Standard Oil made the fuel additives that allowed the Luftwaffe to fly. They could have shut that off at any moment. They didn't. They wanted to make money. And by the way, they wanted the war to keep going because they're eugenicists, depopulationists, and they can make a lot of money on this. So it wasn't a problem to them. So it's just a little tough for me to pat the American Committee on United Europe on the back for raising all this money from the worst people in the world. Of course, when you find out who's running this committee, you're going to be like, oh, well, I mean, I guess Satan was busy sorting out all the devils down in hell and didn't have time to worry about or join the American Committee on Uniting Europe, because it was being run by Alan Dulles and Bill Donovan, the OSS founder. So Hitler and Goebbels incarnate, right? So what this group did, the American Committee on United Europe, was they started uniting Europe, into, the makings of a world government. That's just what they like to do in these things. They started the process of clicking up Europe into one big chunk instead of 30 small disjointed nations. It's kind of like the EU. And under the guise of protecting it, of course, from the, quote, communist threat, really what they wanted, and they weren't even shy about this. They came right out and said it. They said, we want the United States of Europe. And Europe was like, yeah, but we don't want that. Because, we've got all of our different cultures and different languages, and we're not united. You guys might be united in the United States, even though you're really not, but you could be. Theoretically, you're relatively new. You're only a couple hundred years into this experiment. You've got a lot of extra land. You guys could be fine uniting, because but we here in Europe, that's not going to work for us. But you understand the process of why Washington, D.C. and these globalists want it. Again, the money came from the Rockefellers and Fords. So they're eugenicists. They want depopulation and they want world government. And one of the best ways to get to world government, we've seen this, is you take all these individual nation states that are really difficult to control. And what you want to do is regionalize them and group them together as best as you can. The EU is a prime example of this, right? You don't have to control every president of every country in the EU. You just have to control Ursula von der Leyen, right? And of course, that is being done very well. She looks like the principal in Monsters, Inc. to me. Because she's an actual monster. But that's part of what they're talking about, is they want to group these countries up together, so that they're easier to control. And so that's what they sent in this group from the beginning to deal with the communist threat. But this was the start of what they called the European movement. It was a thing. Now, this American Committee on United Europe, it started in 1948. And it was run by Alan Dulles and Bill Donovan, and it ran for 12 years until 1960. But by then, these guys had sort of pivoted to really focusing on the CIA. And then they moved into the European movement, and the European movement, of course, was being run by the CIA. So let's move over to that. So it was 1948. CIA had just been started in September of 1947. So they're just getting a chance to play with their toys and start working on their psychological operations in Europe pretty hard. Now, keep in mind, the CIA's charter is to do all this stuff internationally. So they're not supposed to be, they're not supposed to be operating on United States soil. And maybe they didn't for a while because they had their hands full with everything going on in Europe. But that changed at some point. And now they're completely embedded inside the United States and running psychological operations that had worked in Europe in 1948. They're now taking those psychological operations and bringing them back home to the United States because we have the Smith Modernization Act of 2012, right? Which now allows them to run those psych ops on us. And of course, that's what they did. So one of the things they did was in 1948, they put together something called the Hague Congress, which was hosted, they hosted it and invited 750 delegates from Europe. These were all people or high-ranking officials from the 16 countries that the Marshall Plan had been working with. They just started that. They said, let's get you all together. We got money for you. We want to talk to you. We want to talk to you at this 1948 Hague Congress. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to push Europe closer. You've got to understand the timing of this, that Europe was totally disjointed after this, the countries had been destroyed. The maps of the countries, where the lines were, those had been destroyed. There'd been massive relocations of people resettled in the East. There'd been some people that had been resettled off of this planet altogether, millions of them. The banking institutions were in shambles. The media was a mess. Everything was falling apart. And so the CIA saw this as an opportunity to come in and push all of Europe together and try to get them forming something. You're all in disarray. Let's get you all together and we'll help you out. This is what they called the European movement, except it wasn't European at all. It was the CIA manipulating these governments in conjunction with the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation on behalf of the American interests, of course. So, but at this 1948 Hague Congress, where they got everybody together, they got Churchill there. He was there. But you know who else they got there? They got Kalergi. Have you heard of the Kalergi plan? This is not this resettlement and the remaking of demographics of certain countries, great replacement theory, things like that. These aren't unhinged conspiracy theories by white nationalists. This is what was going on in Europe in 1948. They were talking openly about this. Churchill is meeting with Kalergi at the Hague Congress in 1948, a group that is being put together by the CIA. Now, the European countries aren't supposed to know this, and I don't know if they knew this or not, but Kalergi and Churchill would know a thing or two about population movements, and they would be deeply involved with the British Eugenics Society as well. So that's going to be a problem. But there were others that were at this meeting as well. Bertrand Russell was there, a bunch of other Bilderberg types who all love eugenics. They're there, right? So when you see these, again, I've said this before, I'll say it again, because they have to go together. You initially might think that world government is a standalone operation, but it's always followed very closely with depopulation. They go hand in hand. So when you're talking about world government, and in this particular case, at the 1948 Hague Congress that the CIA put together, they are trying to push Europe together, make them closer. It's the beginnings of a world government for them. That's what they're trying to do. So when you put all of that together to form a world government, you're going to also be covertly talking about depopulation, which is the reason why you would have the likes of Bertrand Russell and Kalergi and Churchill and these people present there. So they could get into the discussion of not just what do we do with the European movement side of things, but also, are we going to need to move people? And whenever you talk about large scale movements of people, that is code for depopulation. Sweden also started a yearly summit back in 1948 called the Tylösand Summit. It's like a smaller kind of like Swedish specific Bilderberg. It still goes on to this day. The Treaty of Brussels was formed in 1948, and that wound up getting folded into NATO the following year in 1949. It was the precursor to NATO because the Treaty of Brussels was focused on Western Europe. And Western Europe, all the countries that were involved in the Treaty of Brussels wound up becoming parts of the initial NATO North Atlantic Treaty Organization, by the way, for the, you know how I love acronyms. Speaking of NATO, we have the 1948 Easter crisis in Denmark. Have you heard of this? You probably haven't unless you're from the region, or unless you're old enough and you're from Europe to remember the 1948 Easter crisis. But this is what this is the situation. You're going to roll your eyes when you hear this. You're just going to go, "We're the worst." So in Denmark, post World War II, the Danes wanted to stay neutral. They just were of the opinion, just leave us out of this. Okay. We've already been put through the ringer with the Nazis, and there was a lot going on. Like, we would prefer to remain neutral during the Cold War. That's what we want to do. But that's a problem for the U.S. And so what they did was they had the CIA, the newly formed CIA, in one of their first bits of business, besides destabilizing the Italian elections, which I think was the first thing they did. Their second bit was to run a psychological operation on the people of Denmark to make them think that the Soviets were just about to invade them. Right. So they did all kinds of crazy things. Those silly Soviets were actually the Americans pretending to be Soviets, so that the Danes would be scared and that they would join NATO out of fear. So they pretended to be the big bad wolf. That's what America did. The Danes had a real fear of the Soviets coming in and just taking them over, or leaning on them and saying, you need to sort of go our way and become part of the post-war, the Soviet Union, or at least, be Warsaw Pact adjacent, right? So somebody that's going to be at least sort of on their side, right? The Danes just wanted to be left alone, right? But they keep hearing that the Soviets are just about to invade them and attack them. But it wasn't them. It was the CIA hijacking communication messages, setting off bombs, blowing things up, pretending to be we're the fucking worst. We're always the bad guys. We are always the bad guys in each scenario, right? So anyway, so to those of you in Denmark that are wondering like how the whole NATO thing came about, well, the CIA spooked you. They pretended to be the Soviets and scared the shit out of your country. So you're welcome. There was a European youth campaign secretly funded by the CIA. I know well, it was funded by the American Committee on United Europe, the group we just talked about, which is really a CIA front group. So, a CIA front group financed by the Rockefellers. So, I mean, you pick your poison there. But what they wanted this European youth campaign, what these guys, the Rockefellers, Fords, CIA asset people, they wanted to create what they called future federalist leaders, young global leaders. You say, interesting, and a future press corp. And they were doing this by targeting and investing money in prominent, young, controllable, up and coming kids, kind of like the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader program. So that's what the European Youth Campaign was doing. So when you hear Klaus Schwab talking about, yes, we will control all the leaders, that is not a new idea. The Rockefellers and Ford Foundation and CIA were doing that in Europe in 1948. That was what they were working on creating. Now that idea didn't go away. It just got repurposed. And now it is fully in effect at the World Economic Forum, in which Klaus Schwab's Young Global Leader program has turned out quite a few prime ministers and of countries around the world. I mean, they're all worthless, of course. They're the they're the defective parts in the conveyor belt. You see them in the form of like Justin Trudeau's and guys like that, Emmanuel Macron's, very feminized men, very weak men. All the men look like they've been probably sexually assaulted in order to get into this club. I mean, I don't know what's going on with Emmanuel Macron, but when you have to release a public statement to the press that your wife is not a man, even though she's 25 years older than you, like that takes me back to like the Ed Markey, the famous sort of situation that Hunter S. Thompson, when he was covering the elections. I want to say it was like 1972, and he was going on and on and on. And this candidate, and he was asking this candidate if he'd ever kicked his Iboga addiction. Iboga is like a psychedelic that you can't get hooked on, right? And he kept accusing this guy of being an addict, of being like hooked. It's like being hooked on mushrooms or something. It's like, I don't think you can get hooked on it. But he just kept on relentlessly accusing this guy of it. And finally someone was like, why did you do that? And he said, oh, I just wanted him to have to come out and deny it. Right. So just to make the guy come out and have to deny that he was a drug addict with this Iboga, issue that he couldn't quite kick was hysterical to Hunter S. Thompson, because the whole thing was bullshit. But just to get the guy feel the need to come out and address the bullshit and to actually deny it was hilarious. And it reminds me of Macron, who has to come out and actively deny the fact that like everybody is speculating that your wife, who's 25 years older than you already, which is kind of weird, let's be honest, is also a man and has always been a man, even back when she was your teacher, when you were 15 years old, when she targeted you. I don't know. It's just funny. I went off on a little bit of a tangent because we were talking about World Economic Forum, young global leaders being a bunch of pussies. And Emmanuel Macron is one of them. So this idea wasn't new. It's not new. Klaus Schwab didn't come up with it. It's not his thing. It'd been working for a while. And 1948 was the year that it really kicked off. It was the same year that Gandhi wasn't eating, started that thing, that whole, I'm not going to eat, I'm going to hold out for peace. Well, what did that get him? It got him assassinated anyway. Someone took a shot at him, killed him. So that happened in 1948. The People's Bank of China was created. That's the central bank of the Communist Party of China. It was created in 1948. The Rockefellers approved of this, of course, because they helped to launch Chase Bank in China and all of their meddling in there. We mentioned Operation Gladio being formed in Western Europe. It predates the formation of NATO, but it was really magnified once NATO came into existence and had a budget. Then they took over Gladio and said, all right, hey, you guys, we know what you guys have been doing sort of unofficially, but we can really finance this. Are you ready for some medical institutions that found their way onto the stage in 1948? You're not going to like this. You're not going to like this one bit, but it had to start somewhere. And in 1948, the World Health Organization was formed by the United Nations, which I will remind everybody for like the 1,000th time, was started by the Rockefellers again. So if you're getting this feeling that the Rockefellers are in everything that we talk about, they're in a lot, maybe not everything, but they're definitely in a lot. And when it comes to groups like the World Health Organization, the Rockefellers were the driving force of that. It is under the umbrella of the United Nations, and it is funded by them and has been funded by them. It is now located in 150 spots around the world. It is an international abomination. The World Health Organization has plans to take over control of the world by putting them in a legal situation in which they are supranational. They are above nations, they are beyond international. They are above it all. So that in a case of a global pandemic, the criteria of which they are in control of, and they would be the ones sounding the alarm when it fits their criteria. But when it does, the World Health Organization will take charge. That's been decided already. So they're no good. And again, I've done an entire episode on the World Health Organization. I certainly can't do it justice in 2 minutes, but just so you know, it started in 1948. You know what else started in 1948? NHS. Well, technically it was brought into legal existence in 1946, but it opened for business in 1948. So the U.S. and the Brits have that to look forward to. There was a bad year for our medicine, and they can sell it however they want. They can talk to you about how they're bringing health services to the underprivileged and all of that. But that's all just a big, gigantic sales pitch for what the World Health Organization and NHS has always been about. And that's depopulation and eugenics. It's population control. It wouldn't be anything else but population control because it was started by the Rockefellers, and that is their entire plan. So the World Health Organization is extremely important for the global vaccine push and the sterilants that are pushed through the vaccines. You can find National Security Council Memorandum 200 released in 1974, written by Henry Kissinger, in which he lays out the plan that our policy, meaning the United States' policy towards the third world, should be that of depopulation, and that their goals were to reduce their populations by at least 50%. Not my opinion, not my speculation. You can read the declassified memo in which he says this. So when and in that memo, they say that the way in which they plan to avoid having the countries take the blame for this depopulation agenda that they are planning to insert into it is that they will have NGO cutouts such as the World Health Organization, and they name them specifically, as the mechanism that would be in the government that would hand out that would sterilize the people without their knowledge, so that if it ever came back on the country, they could say it wasn't us, it was this other group, it was the World Health Organization doing it. And of course that has happened, and that is what they've said, how they've doled out the blame. Something else happened, very important ramifications for today's world, and that is the formation of the State of Israel. It was formed by Zionists. It was formed by terrorists that were Zionists. It is listen, we've got Balfour Declaration back in World War I that set the stage for this. We've got who is a Rothschild agent, a member of the Round Table. We've got the Palestinian War, the Arab-Israeli War. These were happening in 1948, and we ultimately have the foundation of Israel. And with the formation of Israel, you have the Israeli Supreme Court, you have the IDF. Those were all started in 1948 as well. So that is the year in which Israel gets on the map. The way in which it gets on the map is subject to a lot of discussion and debate, but it was made to be its own country, in part because of the Balfour Declaration, in part because of some of the very nefarious deals that were made during World War II, and ultimately they steamrolled the current occupants there over the years, and that's where we go. I think technically they say that Israel was formed in 1947, but again, it's a little bit like the NHS where it starts, where it's created, where the laws go into effect. I mean, this is a process. A lot of this starts well in advance. I mean, starting a country, starting a World Health Organization, it takes time. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. Like I said, the formation of Israel dates back to World War I. So, whenever they put created by, whenever they decide that date is, they really sort of had to hit the ground running after all the wars. And that's when that took place. In addition, the year 1948, like I said, it's an interesting year with regard to some of the countries that came out. Apartheid began in South Africa. Speaking of Israel, the apartheid began in South Africa in 1948. The formation of North Korea, 1948 as well, and Czechoslovakia went communist. So there was a lot going on the geopolitical chessboard, and I mean, there were things that were happening from from intelligence agencies' point of things. Something like Operation Embarrass. It's an interesting name. Is the false flag bombing campaign by MI6, which is the equivalent of like the British CIA, their international group, to try and stop Jewish immigration into the UK. They didn't want, after World War II, they didn't want a bunch of displaced, homeless Jewish people coming to their country, so they set up false flag bombing campaigns to try and scare the Jews away from it. That was called Operation Embarrass. That happened in 1948. They should be embarrassed of that name. That's a pretty dumb name. They should come up with a better one. I like it when they really put some good thought into like the names, when the names don't really mean anything, but you're like, oh shit, that's kind of scary. Like Operation Condor. You're like, oh man, what does that mean? You're like, well, it's bad. Like, what is Operation Embarrass? What is that? Well, we were trying to embarrass. Are you trying to embarrass people? Well, not really. I mean, kind of. It was more like false flag bombs to keep the Jewish people away. I'm like, I come up with a better name than that. But if I ever worked for government, and I never would, but if they captured me and tortured me and made me work for government, I would petition for them to put me in charge of being the guy that names all these things, because I feel like I could do a much better job. The World Council of Churches was formed in 1948 in Amsterdam. I'm not really sure if the World Council of Churches went on to try to depopulate the world, but they might. I'm just going to say that's a maybe. Because it seems like everything else that was going on in 1948 was definitely against humanity, right? Like the formation of these countries that went on to just do unspeakable things. North Korea, South Africa, Israel. I mean, I don't know. Czechoslovakia doesn't really get to. Czechoslovakia is in American folklore held in the highest of regards because it was in the movie Stripes. Okay. It's Czechoslovakia. You go in, you come out, it's Czechoslovakia. You know, it's a legendary country simply because of that one movie, I will say. I'd like for you to know, and we're getting close to the end here. I'm going to wrap this up pretty soon. In 1948, there was the Declaration of Human Rights was made, and it goes as follows: all humans should be entitled to fair treatment, dignity, and equal freedoms, regardless of their personal characteristics or affiliations. That sounds amazing. All humans should be entitled to fair treatment. Yeah, I can get on board with it. Dignity. Okay, I can get on board with that. And equal freedoms, regardless of their personal characteristics or affiliations. Wow, 1948. They finally got something right. The Declaration of Human Rights. You know, you come out of World War II, you probably do need a Declaration of Human Rights that is entitling all people to fair treatment and dignity. Wait, who put together this Declaration of Human Rights? Oh, wait, it was the United Nations. Sorry. Just kidding. They really want you all to die. But that is their declaration. They did declare it, so it's good for something. Hey, in 1948, Babe Ruth died, and that was also the last time that the Cleveland Indians won the World Series. So listen, it's been a long, long time ago, and in the honor of this being my favorite day of the year, opening day of baseball season, I figured I would save that till the end. Maybe the Cleveland Indians will turn it all around and win the World Series this year. We can always dream. Hey, if you like this episode, you can take the additional step right now of sharing it with your friends and family. There's a little share button down at the bottom. If you want to connect with me, the website, macroaggressions.io. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you again soon.